The cross strut control arm, red arrow, connects the steering knuckle, blue arrow, to the rear section of the subframe, yellow arrow. If you are just going to replace the rubber bushing at the end of the cross frame, you may not need to remove the entire strut. You may be able to loosen it from the cross member and press it out. Mercedes uses a special hydraulic portable press, and I was not able to press it out from the strut with the bearing removal tools I had, so I removed the complete cross strut. You will follow these instructions if you are replacing the complete strut or pressing it out in a press. Use a 16mm socket on the large E-torque bolt, red arrow, and a 21mm wrench and remove the mounting hardware from the strut to the cross member. Mercedes uses a special hydraulic portable press to replace the bushing bearing, and I was not able to press it from the strut with the bearing removal tools I had, so I removed the complete cross strut. Begin by removing the brake caliper. Hang them safely out of the way, the caliper mounts, the rotors, and the sensor wiring. Please see the link at the end of this video on those procedures for additional assistance. You will also need to remove the wheel hub and bearing, red arrow, from the spindle on the knuckle, yellow arrow. Please see the link at the end of this video for additional procedures and for further instruction. Use an E10 torque and remove the 3 screws as indicated by the red arrows, holding the dust shield in place, and remove the shield. There is an ABS speed sensor in the knuckle that needs to be removed by using a 10mm wrench from behind, yellow arrow, and then pull the sensor, red arrow, out from the back of the knuckle. Remove the tie rod by inserting a T30 torque in the top end of the tie rod stud, yellow arrow, and then use a 21mm wrench to remove the nut, red arrow. The ball joints are held in place with a surprising amount of force, and while you can whack away at the top of the joint with a hammer, you really run the risk of bending and/or damaging a part of the suspension. Make sure to use the proper tool. A ball joint separator, red arrow, will make quick and easy work of separating the joint. Note, do not get any part of yourself around the joint when separating, as it has a tendency to let go with substantial force. Even though you have removed the tie rod ball joint, you may want to leave it loosely in the knuckle while you remove the other nuts. The cross strut control arm has a ball joint, red arrow, on the end that attaches to the steering knuckle with a nut on the top, yellow arrow. I could not break the nut loose as the steering knuckle was in the way of the socket and I could not get enough space to get a 21mm wrench in there, so I loosened the steering knuckle. Use an E14 and remove the 2 E14 bolts connecting the rear of the knuckle to the strut, red arrow, 1 shown. Use a 16mm socket on the large E-torque bolt, yellow arrow, and a 21mm socket and remove the top nut from the knuckle to the strut. Finally, use a 21mm socket and extension to remove the nut on the top of the ball joint on the cross strut, red arrow. You may have to counterhold the ball joint stud with a T30 torque. Use a ball joint separator to separate the cross strut from the steering knuckle, red arrow. Support the weight of the steering knuckle with a jack once you have the control arm off, and use care not to scratch or damage the spindle, yellow arrow. If you are replacing the complete control arm, installation is the reverse of removal, and don't forget you will need to get the alignment done on the vehicle. If you are pressing out the old bearing and a new one in, begin by placing the new bearing in the freezer overnight. The same constrictions caused by freezing the bearing will help when it comes to pressing it in. Take the control arm to your press and press out the old bearing and insert a new one in. Remember, you must support the underside of the arm with a tool strong enough to support the pressure from the press, red arrow. And you need a socket large enough to sit on the outside of the metal section of the bearing and small enough to be able to pass through the opening in the control arm, yellow arrow. It takes a lot of pressure to remove and install these, so make sure you are taking all safety precautions. You should always be wearing safety glasses whenever you're working on your vehicle, but when working around a press, they're mandatory. Keep your body away from the pinch points and make sure everything in the press is level and the forces are even. Installation is the reverse of removal, and you will need to get the vehicle's alignment checked before you are finished. Thanks for watching. Click here to view the original article along with hundreds of other DIY content for your car.